Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. When I was in my early 20s, I came across a phrase that stayed with me. Big dreams are found on the streets of Los Angeles. From that moment, I was convinced my path to success would lead me to that city. Over time, the idea kept swirling in my mind until at 22, I finally decided to take the leap and move. At first, everything seemed to be falling into place, but it wasn't long before I realized that the dreams weren't as vibrant as I had imagined. The story I'm about to share is the reason I left my hometown to chase a fresh start in the City of Angels. I still vividly remember that day, a day I'd imagined as the beginning of a new, opportunity-filled chapter, but one that turned out to be something entirely different. I was living in an apartment with my childhood best friend Carla. Life with her was amazing. We'd often stay up late talking about our dreams of making it big in Los Angeles. Carla had moved to LA when she was 9 after her dad found a job there. Our moms had been lifelong friends, and we'd grown up together since we were 2, which kept our bond strong despite the distance. I'll never forget how excited she was when I told her I was moving. The first few months were incredible. Carla helped me settle into my new home and adjust to the fast-paced rhythm of the city. She knew LA like the back of her hand and introduced me to her vibrant circle of friends. I soon realized how popular she was in her neighborhood. Everyone called her Lena de la Fiesta, the queen of the party. She explained the nickname came from the countless invitations she received to LA's most legendary events. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Even as a kid, Carla had always loved going out and making the most of every moment. She believed these parties were key to networking, since her ultimate goal was to become an actress. She always made sure to bring me along, and together, we experienced unforgettable nights. Moments I didn't know would soon be overshadowed. But one of those nights became a nightmare I'll never forget. Everything changed the day Carla received an invitation to one of Hollywood's most exclusive parties. I'll never forget the excitement in her voice as she practically bounced around that morning, explaining everything she'd done to secure our spots. When I asked who was hosting the event, her answer stunned me. It was a party thrown by none other than the legendary rapper and producer Sean Combs, better known as Puff Daddy. Of course, I'd heard of him. Who hadn't? His parties were the stuff of LA legend, wild, extravagant, and unforgettable. I couldn't believe Carla had snagged us an invite to a Diddy party. Getting into one of those events was almost impossible unless you were a celebrity. But she explained how a friend of a friend who worked for him had pulled some strings to get her the invite. The entire day was spent preparing for the night ahead. Carla couldn't stop smiling. Her excitement was contagious. She kept telling me this was going to be one of the best nights of our lives, a Hollywood story we'd remember forever. The party was set to take place at Diddy's mansion, tucked away in an exclusive neighborhood in the Hollywood Hills. Though it was scheduled to start at 9:30 p.m., we didn't arrive until closer to 10:30. When we got there, security at the door asked us to hand over our phones. No photos or videos were allowed unless the host explicitly permitted it. The atmosphere was electric, dazzling lights, booming music, and the scent of luxury perfumes hung in the air from the moment we stepped in. The mansion itself was breathtaking, over the top in a way that perfectly mirrored its owner's larger-than-life personality. It was everything I'd imagined and more. It didn't take long before I started recognizing famous faces milling around, escorted by sharp-eyed security guards as they entered. A team was stationed all over the place, ensuring everything ran smoothly. At first, I didn't think it was strange when they asked for our phones, though I didn't like the idea of handing mine over. After all, we rely on our phones for practically everything. Once I stepped inside and saw the high-profile celebrities present, I realized it was a justified security measure. Once inside, the staff escorted us to a table and handed us a piece of paper to sign. Initially, I didn't understand what it was, but I soon realized it was a confidentiality agreement. Carla signed it without hesitation and urged me to do the same so we could get on with the fun. But I hesitated. I've always believed in reading something before signing it, so I took a moment to glance over the document. To my surprise, some parts of the agreement made me uneasy, especially a clause stating that the contract would remain valid for life and 20 years after the signatories' deaths. What could they possibly be hiding behind these doors to warrant such an extreme condition? Anxiety started creeping in. Carla noticed and reassured me that everything was fine. She reminded me how hard it had been to get this invitation, which made me feel pressured. I didn't want to ruin her night, so despite my growing unease, I reluctantly signed the paper. As soon as I did, a man appeared, took us by the hand, and led us further into the mansion. The entire experience felt surreal. I had already experienced a whirlwind few months in Los Angeles, and now I was at a dreamlike party. Then, almost out of nowhere, Sean Combs himself approached us. After some polite small talk and compliments, he told us something unexpected. We weren't to mingle with the rest of the guests. Instead, he said we were part of a select group of special guests and had a reserved place in the VIP section. I was confused. What did he mean? There were huge celebrities here, yet Carla and I were just two ordinary people. Why were we considered special guests? I didn't understand at the time, but I was about to. One of the guards escorted us to a secluded room deeper in the mansion. The moment the door opened, my heart sank. What I saw was nothing short of a nightmare. The room looked like some kind of BDSM dungeon. In every corner, people were engaged in acts I could hardly comprehend. Naked women hung from the ceiling, some with needles piercing their skin, others bleeding as they took part in grotesque activities. I had heard of hematolagnia, a fetish involving blood, but seeing it in person was beyond terrifying. And that was just the surface. The scene before us grew even darker, filled with acts that were too disturbing to fully process. There were things happening that were so extreme and grotesque, so scatological, that I don't even have the words to describe them. I spotted some well-known celebrities among the participants, but I wouldn't dare name them. It was horrifying. I didn't know if we'd accidentally wandered into something we weren't supposed to see, or if we'd even make it out alive. Mr. Combs, visibly intoxicated, eventually approached us. His demeanor was unsettling. He turned us around and began urging us to participate in his sadistic games. Every fiber of my being screamed to run, but I quickly realized escape wasn't an option. He and his associates made it clear. We couldn't leave until they decided we could. I watched in terror as he, with bloodshot eyes, began seducing Carla. He whispered to her, "Come on, this is your chance to make it in Hollywood. No one's going to hurt you, just let yourself go, it's only getting started." It was madness. Time seemed to crawl as we found ourselves trapped in a nightmare. Before we knew it, we were forced to participate. Despite our disbelief and resistance, we were dragged into the chaos of that horrific spiral. I don't know how long it lasted, but just when I thought things couldn't get worse, the situation intensified. Sean Combs, with an eerie smile, leaned in and said, "I've been saving the best for last." Sean Combs then announced that we were about to witness an exclusive BDSM ritual called La Piñata. In any other situation, I might have laughed at the absurdity of the name, but in that place, any sense of humor was replaced by dread. The event, apparently, involved men using padded baseball bats to beat a naked, bound woman. It was depravity at its peak. When they announced it, my blood ran cold. To my horror, several women in the crowd volunteered to participate, and among them was my friend Carla. I tried desperately to talk her out of it, but she was already tipsy and not thinking clearly. It was terrifying. She didn't understand the depth of what she had agreed to when she signed that contract. I watched, paralyzed, as they stripped her naked and strapped her into a harness. Her initial excitement quickly gave way to discomfort, and I tried to approach her, but one of the guards blocked me, sternly reminding me that she had willingly agreed to participate. Then the game began. As the madness unfolded, Carla's face transformed from nervous anticipation to sheer terror within seconds. This wasn't a game, it was outright abuse. These people weren't pretending. They were truly beating her. Carla started screaming that she wanted to stop, but her cries were ignored. Instead, the music was turned up louder, drowning out her suffering. The crowd, far from concerned, cheered and jeered. One man even mocked her, laughing at her anguish as though it were some kind of twisted comedy. Then he went further. He groped her while she struggled. I was both horrified and enraged. I screamed at them to stop and fought to reach her, but the same towering guard held me down, pinning me in place. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched helplessly. The scene spiraled further into chaos. Carla was crying, screaming, and pleading for them to stop, but the depraved crowd only seemed to grow more frenzied, like wolves tearing into prey. When Carla finally collapsed, I froze. My heart sank. That was when the guard finally released me. I ran to her side, but by then she was lying motionless on the floor. Sean Combs acted quickly, ordering the room to be cleared. He claimed he would get help, but his calm demeanor only added to my horror. I watched helplessly as Carla's limp body was carried out like she was nothing more than a discarded doll. Combs assured everyone that he didn't want to cause panic among the guests still partying upstairs. I tried to follow Carla, but Combs's men blocked me. One guard threatened me, saying everything was under control and I would be updated the next day. "Don't worry, she'll be fine," he repeated, though it was clear he was lying. That was the last time I saw Carla. A guard escorted me out of the mansion, but not before reminding me of the contract I had signed. He warned me, in no uncertain terms, of the consequences of doing anything stupid. His parting words, "You have no idea how screwed you'll be if you cross Daddy," sent a chill down my spine. The next day, Carla's absence was glaring. I tried to contact her, to figure out what had happened, but no one gave me a straight answer. As days turned into weeks, her family began pressing for answers. That's when I realized the full weight of my situation. Out of fear, I lied. I contacted Combs through the same friend who had secured the invitation and told him I wanted to come clean to Carla's family. He responded with another threat, reminding me of the contract and the repercussions if I spoke out. He hinted at violence and even imprisonment. Under immense pressure, I lied to her parents, saying she had run away and left town. That lie tore me apart, but I felt I had no other choice. Carla's family reported her missing, and despite their best efforts, she was never found. The authorities worked tirelessly, but they couldn't uncover the truth. I was left to live with the crushing guilt that my choices had cost my best friend her life. This story eventually surfaced anonymously through someone using a pseudonym. The police investigated but found no leads. There was no evidence tying the events of that night to Sean Combs, nor was there any way to connect them to me. But justice has a way of catching up. Over time, the horrific things Combs did at his parties began to surface. What the public learned was just the tip of the iceberg. Even his closest friends weren't safe from scrutiny. The authorities were relentless in their pursuit of the truth, determined to expose the twisted underworld he had cultivated. Meanwhile, I'm left with the haunting silence of what happened. Carla is still missing. The weight of her absence and the knowledge of what likely became of her gnaws at me every day. Her life, my best friend's life, was cruelly taken, snuffed out by a man in his vile world of power and corruption. On my 19th birthday, a friend of mine, a regular pot smoker, convinced me to try some of his stuff, as he liked to call it. That turned out to be a very foolish decision on my part, one that I would come to regret deeply. It all began that morning at school. I had decided to organize a sleepover at my house and invited my two best friends, Enzo and Patrick. Enzo and I had been friends since childhood. We'd always shared a class. Patrick, on the other hand, was younger than me, but we had a close bond and always kept in touch. In high school, the three of us ended up in the same class. Just so you know, in my country, we finish high school at 19. It was around 9 a.m. when Enzo approached me as I was gathering my books. We greeted each other and chatted casually about school. Then, out of nowhere, he changed the subject and brought up the party. "Hey, thanks for inviting me over tonight," he said. "Of course, buddy, I couldn't imagine spending my birthday without you," I replied. Cool, because I've got a special gift for you. Really? What is it? I asked, intrigued. You're going to love it, but it's a surprise, he said, grinning. All right, I love surprises. Keep it a secret until tonight, I said with a smile. He chuckled and asked, By the way, did you invite anyone else? Yes, of course. Patrick's coming too. I wanted to invite more people, but after last year's chaos, my parents wouldn't let me, I explained. Oh, I remember that. It was wild, he said, laughing. Yeah, they were furious when Patrick broke the window. Anyway, see you at 8 p.m. at my house, I reminded him as I headed to class. At the time, I didn't think much about the gift Enzo mentioned. I figured it was probably a bottle of liquor, pretty standard for those days. Back then, I loved to drink and party, so it wasn't unusual for my friends to gift me alcohol. The day flew by, and before I knew it, school was over. When I got home, I saw that my parents had already left. They decided to take a trip after I assured them I wanted the house all to myself for my birthday. I dropped my backpack on my bed and got to work setting everything up. I turned on some music, set up mattresses, ordered pizza, and then plopped down on the couch to wait for my friends. It was around 8:30 p.m. when the doorbell finally rang. They're here, I thought, jumping up and rushing to the door. Relax, don't act like you're my mom, Enzo said with a smirk as I opened the door. Here's your present, he added, handing me a small package. We were late because we took the wrong bus, Patrick explained, slightly out of breath. Well, since you're finally here, let's start drinking, I exclaimed excitedly. Oh, come on, that's so boring, Enzo replied, catching me off guard. At first I thought he had finally matured and given up drinking, but then he surprised me. No, dude, I've moved on to better things. I've got something way more interesting for you, birthday boy. I stared at him, a mix of excitement and apprehension brewing inside me. Curiosity got the best of me. All right, let's go to my room, I said, eager to find out what he had planned. Take off your shoes and let's head upstairs, I added as I led them inside. Once we were in my room, I closed the curtains and we sat down in a circle. Enzo suddenly became serious, pulling a small bag out of his backpack. What's that? I asked, unsure if I even wanted to know. It's ecstasy. A friend of mine got it. It's the real deal, he explained, his mischievous smile making my stomach churn. In that moment, I had no idea what I was in for. My curiosity and youthful recklessness took over. The atmosphere grew tense as Patrick and I exchanged uncertain glances before shrugging. Well, let's give it a try, I said casually, having no clue how much my life was about to change. Enzo reassured us, saying, Don't worry, it's a clean dose, just enough to have fun. I looked at the pills in his hand, feeling no fear, just intrigue. Truth be told, I had always wanted to try ecstasy. Back then, it wasn't considered dangerous, and not much was known about its potential risks. Plus, I trusted Enzo, so I hesitated only briefly before taking one. We were all excited, oblivious to what could go wrong. We decided to sit on the couch and watch TV while waiting for the drug to kick in. About 20 minutes later, though, I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. Patrick and Enzo, on the other hand, showed no signs of anything unusual. Do you feel anything? I asked Patrick. No, nothing, he replied, sounding bored. Maybe they don't work. Let's take another, Enzo suggested. No, I don't think so, I said, shaking my head. I've already got some discomfort from the first pill. Little did I know that pain would ultimately save my life. Enzo and Patrick shrugged off my hesitation and took more pills. Meanwhile, the pain in my stomach grew worse, and I started feeling nauseous. I thought the pill was affecting me, but not in the way I had expected. I straightened up on the couch, glancing over at my friends. At first they seemed fine, calm, watching TV and laughing. But then I noticed something was off. Patrick was blinking repeatedly, not responding to anything I said. Hey Patrick, can you hear me? I asked. The silence that followed sent chills down my spine. Then I saw it, saliva dripping from his mouth, his hands trembling. and his eyes slowly closing. Panic overtook me. "Enzo, are you okay? Look at Patrick. What's wrong with him?" I shouted. I don't feel so good either," Enzo stammered, his voice weak. "What the hell did you give us? Patrick looks like a zombie," I yelled, but Enzo barely acknowledged me. And then it happened. Patrick collapsed off the couch, convulsing violently on the floor. My heart raced as adrenaline coursed through me. I rushed to his side, grabbing him by the shoulders in a desperate attempt to stabilize him. But then I saw it. His eyes widened, staring into nothingness, and a foamy liquid began pouring from his mouth. I froze, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Suddenly his body went stiff, his eyes fixed in an expression of pure terror, and then he stopped moving. Patrick, wake up, say something," I screamed, shaking him frantically. But he didn't respond. His skin was growing pale and I couldn't feel his pulse. I didn't know what to do. The gravity of the situation hit me like a fist. "Enzo, you have to help me. Patrick isn't breathing," I shouted, my voice thick with desperation. But Enzo just leaned back, rocking slowly, as if none of it mattered. Panic surged through me and my head started spinning. Before I knew it, I was doubled over, retching violently. I vomited uncontrollably, my body betraying me in the chaos. Despite the nausea and dizziness, I knew I had to act. I was the only one who could. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I stumbled to my feet and ran to grab my phone. My heart pounded erratically, and my hands trembled as I dialed for an ambulance. Everything from that moment onward became a blur, whether from the drugs or the sheer terror that paralyzed me. The paramedics arrived quickly. They moved with precision, loading us into ambulances. Patrick was taken to one while Enzo and I were placed in another. I barely registered the chaos around me. At the hospital, I was assigned a bed. Exhaustion overwhelmed me, and as soon as I lay down, I fell into a deep, heavy sleep. I had no memory of what they did to me afterward. When I finally woke up, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. I overheard nurses talking and realized, with a sickening jolt, that Patrick hadn't survived. My world collapsed. Tears poured down my face as I tried to comprehend the unbearable weight of his loss. Grief consumed me. I sobbed harder than I ever had before, my chest aching as the guilt wrapped around me like chains. Enzo, I learned, had survived, but just barely. He had spent the entire day vomiting and suffering seizures. Later, the truth about the pills came out. They weren't what we thought they were. They had been laced with PMA, a substance far more toxic than ecstasy. That's why they had taken so long to kick in. Patrick had taken 3, a fatal dose. The aftermath was devastating. Enzo was sentenced to 5 years in prison for distributing the pills, while I was hit with a $5,000 fine and 100 hours of community service. My parents were beyond furious. Their disappointment in me was palpable, and I had destroyed the trust they'd placed in me. Yet, despite their anger, they were also grateful that I was alive. I wasn't sure if I deserved their relief. The truth is, I don't even like to think about what followed. The nightmares, the crushing anxiety, they haunted me for years. The guilt was suffocating, gnawing at me day and night. I spiraled into depression, feeling trapped in an inescapable hole of regret. It took years to even begin clawing my way out. That one horrendous night shattered my world completely, leaving scars I wasn't sure would ever heal. "Welcome to the party," I shouted excitedly as my friends arrived. There were just 4 of them, 3 guys and a girl. We weren't super close, but I thought it would be fun to invite them to celebrate my birthday. I'd ordered several boxes of pizza, a ton of drinks, and the speakers were blasting electronic music to set the mood. I set up the video game console and started playing with the guys, while Alexa, the girl in the group, headed over to the speakers and began dancing. She was dating Kevin and wasn't holding back, moving like she was on stage. Every now and then, Kevin would glance up from the game to smile at her, but I couldn't help noticing that Douglas, one of the other guys, kept sneaking looks at Alexa. It was like a mini love triangle unfolding before my eyes, and I had to suppress a smirk. At one point, Alexa convinced Kevin to join her on my makeshift dance floor in the living room. Soon, the two were doing goofy, exaggerated moves, which had everyone laughing. The party vibe was perfect so far. I really wish it had stayed that way. A little later, Kevin asked where the bathroom was, and I pointed him in the right direction. He mentioned he'd be a while, so we kept playing as Alexa continued dancing to different tracks. That's when Douglas, out of nowhere, walked up to her, grabbed her waist, and started dancing with her. Mason, the last of the guys, and I exchanged glances. I just shrugged and took a sip of my beer. If Douglas wanted to hit on his friend's girlfriend, that was his problem. I figured he'd probably end up with a black eye by the end of the night. Alexa didn't seem to mind. In fact, she smiled at Douglas, and it became clear that neither of them cared we were all watching. Then, shockingly, Douglas leaned in and kissed her. My jaw practically hit the floor. It wasn't just a quick peck. It was a full-on, passionate kiss, complete with a butt squeeze. "Are you serious?" Mason muttered under his breath. Kevin could walk in any second, and these two were making out right there in the open. Mason and I were stunned, but Alexa and Douglas seemed totally lost in the moment. "This is going to blow up," Mason whispered, frowning. I couldn't help but laugh, but then we heard a door slam. Alexa immediately pulled back, disentangling herself from Douglas, just as Kevin walked into the room. Both Alexa and Douglas looked disheveled, breathing heavily, but they acted like nothing had happened. Kevin, oblivious, smiled at Alexa, who ran over to hug him like everything was fine. "Hey, I've got a pool table in the basement," I said, trying to steer the mood elsewhere. Kevin's face lit up, and he headed for the stairs, with Mason and Douglas following close behind. Alexa joined them, but I stayed back for a few more minutes to finish my game. A little while later, Douglas came back into the living room looking rumpled. I didn't say anything, but I had a strong suspicion he and Alexa had been up to something. Soon, Mason joined me, and we played video games and drank for a couple of hours. Then Kevin stormed back in, his face red with fury. "Who the hell is the son of a kind that slept with my girl?" he roared, glaring at all of us. We froze, trying to look innocent and resisting the urge to glance at Douglas. It was obvious who he meant, though. Behind Kevin, Alexa was crying, her makeup smeared as she stared at the floor, biting her lip and hugging herself like she was drowning in guilt. "Answer me!" Kevin yelled again, his voice even louder. I raised my hands, trying to calm him. "Take it easy, man." But he wasn't having it. "Don't tell me to calm down," he barked, pulling a pistol from his waistband and pointing it straight at us. Time seemed to stop. My heart was pounding in my chest as I realized how quickly things had escalated. Kevin was clearly drunk, and though I hoped he wouldn't actually use the gun, the look in his eyes told me otherwise. Mason, trying to de-escalate, backed away slowly. "Kevin, come on, man, let's talk. Put the gun down." That only seemed to rile Kevin up even more. His grip tightened on the weapon, and before anyone could react, he fired a shot. The sound was deafening. Alexa screamed, and I instinctively ducked as the bullet shattered a vase near the TV. Chaos erupted. I dove for cover behind the couch while Kevin kept shooting wildly. It felt like I was trapped in a scene from an action movie. Except I wasn't some hero with slick moves. I was just a terrified guy trying to survive. Every time something near me was hit, my heart would race in horror. It was clear that Kevin was aiming directly at me. The chaos was overwhelming, but then suddenly, all I could hear were a series of empty clicks. That's when Douglas burst out laughing. Maybe it was the alcohol or just the shock of it all, but Mason and I started laughing too. Sure, it was a terrible decision, and it probably made Kevin angrier. But at that moment, laughter felt like the only thing that could counter all the fear. Kevin, however, was not amused. His bloodshot eyes narrowed, and in an instant he dropped the gun, reached into his boot, and pulled out a knife. The laughter died in our throats, and the tension in the room became suffocating. Alexa screamed at him to stop, but it was like he didn't even hear her. We all scattered in different directions trying to save ourselves. Kevin went straight for Douglas, which wasn't surprising since he'd been the one to laugh. He grabbed him, and Douglas screamed, trying to break free. That's when Mason, in a burst of bravery, jumped in to protect him. He yanked Kevin back, but the man was quick. He spun around and stabbed Mason in the shoulder. Time seemed to stop. My heart was pounding in my chest as I realized how quickly things had escalated. Kevin was clearly drunk, and though I hoped he wouldn't actually use the gun, the look in his eyes told me otherwise. Mason, trying to de-escalate, backed away slowly. "Kevin, come on, man, let's talk. Put the gun down." That only seemed to rile Kevin up even more. His grip tightened on the weapon, and before anyone could react, he fired a shot. The sound was deafening. Alexa screamed, and I instinctively ducked as the bullet shattered a vase near the TV. Chaos erupted. I dove for cover behind the couch while Kevin kept shooting wildly. It felt like I was trapped in a scene from an action movie, except I wasn't some hero with slick moves. I was just a terrified guy trying to survive. Every time something near me was hit, my heart would race in horror. It was clear that Kevin was aiming directly at me. The chaos was overwhelming, but then, suddenly, all I could hear were a series of empty clicks. That's when Douglas burst out laughing. Maybe it was the alcohol or just the shock of it all, but Mason and I started laughing too. Sure, it was a terrible decision, and it probably made Kevin angrier, but at that moment, laughter felt like the only thing that could counter all the fear. Kevin, however, was not amused. His bloodshot eyes narrowed, and in an instant, he dropped the gun, reached into his boot, and pulled out a knife. The laughter died in our throats, and the tension in the room became suffocating. Alexa screamed at him to stop, but it was like he didn't even hear her. We all scattered in different directions, trying to save ourselves. Kevin went straight for Douglas, which wasn't surprising since he'd been the one to laugh. He grabbed him, and Douglas screamed, trying to break free. That's when Mason, in a burst of bravery, jumped in to protect him. He yanked Kevin back, but the man was quick. He spun around and stabbed Mason in the shoulder. Time seemed to stop. Mason's scream echoed in my ears as he grabbed his shoulder, blood pouring from the wound. "I'm going to have the last laugh, you," Kevin shouted, his voice full of rage. I was hiding behind the couch, my heart pounding as I watched the madness unfold. Alexa was next to me, covering her face, sobbing quietly. But then, like a miracle, the front door crashed open, and 2 police officers stormed in, guns drawn. "Hands up," they ordered. They threw Kevin to the floor, wrenching the knife from his hand. Kevin struggled, but the officers overpowered him, pinning him down and slapping handcuffs on him. Just like that, the chaos came to an abrupt halt. They called an ambulance for Mason and Douglas, taking them away for treatment. Mason, grimacing in pain, looked at Alexa, whose face had gone pale. Apparently, the neighbors had called the police after hearing the gunshots, and they'd responded quickly, thankfully. As the officers took our statements and led Kevin away in their patrol car, I tried to process everything that had just happened. I went to clean up the mess in my house, still shaking from the thought that I could have easily died that night. Then it hit me. What had I been thinking, inviting strangers into my home? I popped an aspirin, trying to clear my mind. I told myself not to dwell on it, but it was obvious that I would never see that crazy group again. The night had been a complete disaster, and I knew it would never be the same. This happened over 3 decades ago, and I still shudder when I think about it. My wife Lissa and I were invited to spend a night at the mountain cabin owned by our friends, Tom and Sarah. They had recently gotten engaged and wanted to celebrate with us, as well as my brother Brian and his girlfriend Sophia. Brian offered to drive us all. When we arrived at the cabin nestled in a beautiful forest, we parked on the road and went inside to greet them. It was around 7 p.m., and Sarah had prepared a wonderful dinner. We ate, chatted, reminisced about old times, and later played board games, accompanied by wine and snacks. I'm not sure of the exact time, but it must have been close to 10 p.m. when we suddenly heard a knock at the door. We exchanged puzzled looks, and I asked if they were expecting anyone else. Tom said no, but Sarah went to open the door and I stood beside her. A young woman, appearing to be in her 20s, stood there. She looked pale with dark circles under her eyes and said her truck had broken down and needed help. Behind her, a man in the driveway waved from inside a truck with the hood open. Brian and I glanced at Tom, who offered to go check the vehicle. Meanwhile, the girl stepped inside and immediately asked for food. We were stunned by the oddness of it all, but Sarah, ever hospitable, offered her leftover chicken and a banana. The girl devoured the banana like she hadn't eaten in days. We tried making small talk, but her responses were vague and she seemed uninterested. The cozy atmosphere of the cabin turned uneasy with her presence. Something about the situation felt off, though we dismissed it as a minor inconvenience. Little did we know, it was the start of a nightmare we'd never forget. As the girl continued eating, I grew uneasy. Looking out the window to check on the repair, I saw no sign of Tom or the man. Concerned, I told Brian we needed to investigate. He agreed, and we walked down the driveway, discussing our suspicions. When we reached the truck, we found a toolbox on the ground and tools scattered around. We called for Tom, but the silence was unsettling. By then, it was nearing 11 p.m., and the night was pitch dark. Without flashlights, it was nearly impossible to see. Brian suggested calling the police, but just as we turned back, a piercing scream stopped us cold. It came from the cabin. Without hesitation, we sprinted back. Inside, we found a horrifying scene. The girl was kicking and screaming at the bathroom door, a knife in her hand. Brian and I tackled her, wrestled the knife away, and restrained her. While Brian held her down, I checked on the others. Sarah had a cut on her arm, but it wasn't serious. Lissa and Sophia were unharmed but visibly shaken. I asked about Tom, but no one knew where he was. Lissa tried calling the police, but the phone line was dead. Realizing we had to act, I asked Sarah for flashlights. She pointed to a shelf, and Brian and I left to search for Tom. We assured the girls we'd be back in 20 minutes and that they'd be safe. Brian and I headed into the woods, and after some searching, we discovered a fallen telephone pole. Someone had sabotaged it, explaining the deadline. "We need to get back," I said, and we hurried to the cabin. As we neared, 2 gunshots echoed through the forest. Stunned, we froze momentarily before rushing back. When we reached the driveway, the truck was gone, along with Tom's toolbox. With no time to process, we ran into the house, only to find it empty. Sarah, Lissa, Sophia, and the tied-up girl had vanished. We searched every room in the yard but found no trace of them. It was as if they'd disappeared into thin air. Wasting no time, Brian and I jumped into his car and sped to the nearest police station. We explained everything to the police, but they seemed uncertain about what to do. They started organizing a search but yielded nothing, and the rest of the night was a haze of uneasiness as we waited for them to return. I don't want to delve into details, but the search was a complete disaster. We had no clue what had occurred, and no one ever discovered what became of the girls or Tom. That story has haunted me for my entire life. I have no answers, only the certainty that everything changed that night at the cabin. Brian and I remain close, forever bonded by what we went through, but sometimes the questions are worse than any answers. We will never forget what happened on that night. Europe had been an unforgettable adventure. I kept asking myself why I hadn't done it sooner. I always believed Italy was my favorite destination, but now Spain seemed to be taking the lead. While at my motel, I decided to search for a nearby restaurant. The incredibly friendly receptionist suggested one just 5 minutes away. The Yelp reviews were glowing, so I decided to give it a try. When I arrived, I was captivated by the design. The architecture was stunning, one of those things I truly admire about Spain. As I approached, a security guard kindly held the door open for me. I stepped inside, apologized for keeping the waitress waiting, and she reassured me with a warm smile that it wasn't an issue. I chose a quiet corner, sat down, and began browsing the menu, debating what to order. Just then, 2 girls walked in, laughing like they were the happiest people alive. The waitress returned to take my order, and as I looked up I noticed the same girl standing right in front of me. The blonde smiled and teasingly said, "You took our spot, but since you're new, I'll let it slide." I introduced myself quickly. "Oh, sorry, I'm Nate. Nice to meet you." She shook my hand, smiling, and introduced herself as Para. The other girl, a shy brunette, said her name was Dora. "Nice to meet you. What brings you to Spain?" I asked, trying to spark a conversation. Para explained they were on vacation and then asked about my trip. I shared that I had taken a break from college after my third year, that it was a spur-of-the-moment decision, and that I'd started in Italy, enjoying the best pizza of my life before traveling through France to see the Eiffel Tower and finally reaching Amsterdam. They were ecstatic. "Oh my gosh, it sounds like you're having the time of your life," exclaimed Para, visibly envious. "I wish I could do that too," Dora added with a hint of sadness. "Don't worry," I said, trying to lift her spirits. "There's still plenty of time for adventures." The atmosphere grew lively, filled with laughter and a sense of connection. Before long, Para asked if I'd mind exchanging numbers. I happily agreed, and we shared contacts. 3 days later, I got a text from Para. "Hey, newbie, want to hang out with us? Check the location I tagged." Without hesitation, I replied that I'd be there. I jumped out of bed, took a long, refreshing shower, and chose my best blue vintage shirt and shorts. As I looked in the mirror, I thought, "You're a good guy, Nate." I stepped out of the hotel, feeling the cool Spanish breeze against my skin, and I laughed as I slid on my sunglasses. This was going to be an amazing day, I thought, following the map directions on my phone. The location was about 20 minutes away, so I called for an Uber. While waiting, I drifted into my thoughts, recalling my teenage years and how much I'd changed since then. I reflected on some regrettable decisions, especially involving Gloria, and wondered where she might be now. The sound of a car horn pulled me back to reality. I got in, shared the address with the driver, and relaxed. As we neared the destination Para had sent, I admired the beauty of the surroundings, captivated by the architecture of each building we passed. When we arrived, the driver, with a thick Spanish accent, announced, "We're here." I thanked him with a smile, left a generous tip, and confirmed the location on my phone. In front of me stood an impressive apartment block with a stunning design. I texted Para to let her know I'd arrived. She replied, asking me to take the elevator to the 3rd floor and ring the bell at apartment 40. Heart pounding slightly, I stepped into the elevator, eager to see what adventures lay ahead. The girls and I had been having so much fun, and I had a feeling this night would be unforgettable. When I rang the bell, Dora opened the door, smiling shyly. "Welcome to our lovely abode," she said, inviting me in. I stepped inside and admired the decor. "Wow, this place is amazing," I said, taking in the details. Para, emerging from the kitchen with a glass of wine, joined us. "Our roommate is responsible for all this," she explained. "3 rooms? That sounds awesome," I replied, accepting the glass of wine she offered. She pointed to a cozy couch in the living room, where I settled in. Dora soon appeared with cookies and brownies. "Looks like you've planned a nice afternoon," I joked, grabbing a cookie. "Of course. You have to enjoy Spain's weather. It's all on us," Dora replied, pulling out a small bottle of pills. "Take one of these," she said with a smile. Without much thought, I popped one into my mouth, washing it down with a gulp of wine. The effects were swift. I felt euphoric, eating brownies and downing tequila shots. Meanwhile, Para and Dora seemed composed, not as intoxicated as I was. Eventually, the mix of alcohol and drugs overwhelmed me, and I passed out on the couch. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, my head was pounding. A searing headache hit me as I tried to stand. That's when I realized I was tied to a chair in what looked like an old warehouse. What the hell is going on? I thought, my mind racing back to the drinks and pills. Why would Para and Dora do this? What do they want? Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Looking toward the door, I froze. It was someone I never expected. Gloria. With a sinister smile, she approached. "You must be wondering how you ended up here," she said. "Para and Dora are my roommates. They told me about a boy they met, and the description fit you perfectly." She laughed as she spoke. "I told them how you cheated on me and left me for someone else. We decided it was time you learned your lesson." She yelled, "Come on, guys!" Two large men entered, carrying a box emitting icy fumes. My blood ran cold. I knew what it was. A box of ice. "Please, Gloria, you don't have to do this. It was all a mistake," I begged, struggling against the ropes. But without hesitation, they shoved me into the freezing box. "No, no!" I screamed as the cold metal surrounded me. I heard the lock click and Gloria's final words, "See you in hell, loser." Darkness consumed me as my body froze into nothingness. Then, suddenly, I regained consciousness. It was as if my soul had been revived. Faint music and laughter echoed in the distance. The girls were partying as though nothing had happened. Thankfully, I still had my phone. With the last bit of strength, I sent my location to the hotel receptionist. Time blurred, but I eventually woke in a hospital bed. The receptionist had alerted the police and the Guardia Civil had rescued me. Relief washed over me, but guilt lingered. I believed in karma and regretted betraying Gloria. Yet what she did to me was pure evil.